Yeah, I'm Bryan Thomas Schmidt, and this isn't the whole story. In fact, it's not even part of the story behind my stories, because Hank and I talked too much, and he didn't ask hardly any questions, and the hour went by too quick, and so we didn't really get to cover my story. And so this is part of the story behind my stories, but it's not the story behind my stories. I'm just saying.
You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Hahn,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Bryan Thomas Schmidt.
episode 254. Be sure to visit the show notes at hankgarner.com. We're giving away some signed copies of some of the books we talk about in today's episode.
author interviews with the very best folks in publishing today. Whether it's indie, traditional publishing, hybrid, no matter what, we talk to them all from all across the spectrum of genre to bring you the very best in the craft of writing. It's because of our great sponsors that we're able to bring you these excellent shows, and I'd like to thank some of those sponsors today. If you would like to sponsor the show, go to hankgarner.com, and there's a link in the menu that says advertise. Click on that and you can help sponsor the show as well. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned, my very favorite monthly publication. If you want that old pulp magazine feel that you used to get when you were a kid, Tales from the Canyons of the Damned is the book for you. They're up to episode 19 now, the Halloween issue, and you're going to love it. Each month features a different set of writers bringing you the best in weird, pulpy stories. Tales from the Canyons of the Damned. Go pick it up today. From my friend Nick Breaker, Essence, Book 1, Septima. Nick Breaker is one of the best science fiction writers out there today, and this new series that he's working on is crazy good. It mixes urban fantasy and science fiction and extraterrestrials in a great mix that delivers a story that's adventure with a little steamy and guaranteed to keep you glued to the page. Essence, Book 1, Septima by Nick Breaker. Go pick it up today. ThirdScribe.com is the place to go if you love books, or if you're a writer and want to connect with other writers, or you want to find readers for your books. ThirdScribe.com can help you get started. You can join for free and meet some of your favorite writers, or you can set up a basic author website for free, and then there's multiple levels of help and support that you can get from ThirdScribe.com. I love these guys. I love what they're doing. Go visit ThirdScribe.com today and let Rob and the good folks help you get started. Also, Chronicle World's B-Movie is the latest Future Chronicles edition, book 16 in the Future Chronicles. This book is awesome, and it's been climbing up the charts since it released just this past week. Mummies and giant robots, werewolves and killer koalas, plague creatures and demonic clowns. They're coming, they're hungry, and they're not human intolerant. In this title and the acclaimed Future Chronicles series of speculative fiction anthologies created by award-winning author Samuel Peralta, the destination is the B-Movie, the realm of the outlandish and the macabre, the strange and the unexpected. Go pick up B-Movie, Chronicle Worlds today. Thanks to all our sponsors. At the end of the show, as always, we're going to have a audio clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I've said it on the show before, and it still rings true, that one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is all of the great people that I get to meet, and relationships that you get to form with other writers, and people that you keep in contact with over the years. And it's just a really cool thing to look back and see all of the relationships that are formed through this podcast. And today I have Bryan Thomas Schmidt on the show with me. If you all remember, he was on episode 68 of Author Stories, and Bryan, I always start with the same question, but I've asked you that question before, and if I remember right, your answer to your first memory of wanting to be a writer was that you were the kid that orchestrated all of your friends into acting out your stories for you. Is that right?
You know what? That's actually true. I didn't even remember you asking me that, but I was the guy on the playground that would like organize all the kids to play all these really creative games, and I had all the vision for it, and I would just like direct them and stuff. And I kind of enjoyed it until I moved to a new school, and then I was the geek, and nobody liked me, and I couldn't do that anymore. And that kind of sucked.
Yeah,
but yeah. At first I was doing that.
Yeah.
And,
And,
I can't believe it was episode 68 that I was on before, Hank. I gotta say, what was that, like last week? I mean, you were doing so many shows right now.
You know, we've done one every weekday, the month of October. You know, the mistake I made was, to ask my wife to help me with the podcast because it had gotten just unwieldy and just, you know, too much work for one person. You know, the sitting down for an hour to record a show is the fun part. And that's the easy part because you get to geek out about the things that you love. It's all the hours that go into finding new guests and then all the reading that goes into, you know, after you've lined up a guest, you know, you got to familiarize yourself with their work. And most of that is fun too. You know, and then all the email, and it's just a lot of stuff that goes around that hour that you get to sit down and talk about writing. And so when she did, she said, okay, I've got this. And then she comes back and she said, I accidentally scheduled like 20 shows this week. So I hope you want to put out some extra shows. So I was like, well, heck yeah, let's do it, you know. So yeah, and now November's shaping up kind of the same way. So yeah, we're putting out lots of shows, but there's lots of folks to talk to, you know, and you never know if tomorrow is promised, so you might as well talk to them all.
Well, I'm kind of glad it's going so well for you. Is the only reason I brought it up. You know, I think it's really great that you're doing so well, and I appreciate the chance to come back on. But yeah. You know, one of my earliest memories is being on this podcast on show 60. No, I'm just kidding. Just we're like episode 200 and something now. I'm just like amazed, you know.
Yeah, you know, we'll Halloween will be episode 250, so it's insane. But anyway, yeah, when episode 68, when you came in, it was like the first week of November 2015. Or November 10th, 2015. So yeah, 2 years ago since you were on. But anyway, so since we can't start with our classic first question, what is your favorite book from when you were a kid? What was the book that you have gone back and read, or at least look back fondly as a book that was something that was formative for you?
Boy, you know, I'm trying to think. When I was, I guess it includes teenage years when you think of it. I always think like younger, you know. But when it comes to teenage years, Lord Valentine's Castle by Robert Silverberg was hugely formative for me as a writer. Hugely amazing world building, and you know, just this whole landscape that he created was so amazing to me. So that definitely Lord Valentine's Castle, the first of his Madripoor Chronicles or his Madripoor stories, is definitely one of them. It's one I reread every few years. So that's probably the best answer to give. I'm trying to think of a couple others. I can't even think of the names of them, but there were a couple of others that I'm blanking on right now that I read when I was younger. But yeah, definitely Lord Valentine's Castle by Robert Silverberg.
You know, I asked a question on Facebook in our Facebook group a week or two ago, facebook.com/group/author stories podcast. Come join us. You know, I asked people if there was a book that they had read over and over again, and the vast majority of people had at least a book that they go back and revisit over and over again throughout their life, and it holds some special meaning to them. And you know, it's kind of weird sometimes the things that resonate with us, and even when you go back and reread it, it might not even be a great book, but it just means something to you. But there were a couple of people that replied something like, you know, life's too short, there's too many books to read, I would never go back and reread a book. And you know, it's an interesting thing that books and stories become a part of who we are, and something that we go back and reread and revisit that world from time to time.
I actually kind of feel bad for people that feel that way. I mean, I understand it to a degree. Because I don't reread a lot of books because I don't have the time either.
Well, sure.
But at the same time, to not have that kind of connection with a book where you like just, I mean, you know, I don't reread it like once a year. I reread it every 5 to 7 years, and it's almost like going back as a kid again and rediscovering certain elements of it that you've forgotten, all the little details. You know, it's really actually fun. So I kind of feel, in some ways that they're losing out a little bit with that attitude. But I mean, I guess to each his or her own. Books, I couldn't be stuck somewhere without books, and some people I guess can live without books. You know, I mean,
Right.
I can't imagine life without books.
It would be a sad place to be.
It would be.
Yeah.
By the way, I thought your choice of My Little Pony Volume 1 was an interesting choice for that list.
Don't judge me, Brian. Don't judge me. You know what? Everybody has their thing, okay?
Hey, you want to be a brawny? Hey,
You know
no
what?
judgment, brother.
I've been called worse by better people.
By better people. I can believe that. I've seen your guest list.
Well, oh, they've called me much worse, believe me. Oh man. The last time we talked, you were working on a book series based on the life of Joseph. Was it the biblical character
Moses.
Joseph? But
Moses. It's Moses.
I'm sorry, Moses. And a kind of science fiction take on that. Where is that project now?
The third book came out on September 27th. It's called The Exodus. The overall series is called The Saga of Maberry. The book is out. I think I sent you those, but I sent him so many books he probably hadn't had time to read everything. But yeah, The Exodus is out, and so I finally completed that. So I'm pretty pleased. It's something I dreamed up when I was like 15 years old. So I'm 48 now. So it took me 33 years to realize all of it. But yeah, it's all done now. So
yeah, how does that feel? Bringing something to a close that was that kind of meant so much to you all those years, and something that you envisioned so early.
Well, it's surreal in a way, and at the other time you're like, thank God I finally got that done. Well, part of it is because, the first book I wrote it in 2008, 2009, and it came out 2011 in its original version. And then the second book came out, and the publishing company kind of just died right as the book came out. And so it never went anywhere. So for 2-3 years, it was dormant. And then a new publisher came along that wanted to re-release them and gave me the opportunity to kind of revise them with the new book that I'd finished, book 3 finally. And bring them up so that, because you get to a point where you're, as a writer, you're writing at a different level. And as you get there, you're like, if I go back and write book 3 now, the other 2 books are going to feel like they're by a different author because my writing is different than it was back then. So I got the chance to kind of brawl up to where I am so they feel more like a unified body, and also fix some of the criticisms that I'd gotten and some of the holes that people had found and different things, and just kind of make it more unified and better. So I did new versions of the first 2 books, which are The Worker Prince and The Returning, and those came out. I think the next one came out 8-9 months later, and now I have the third one finally out, and it's brand new. And so, the feeling of accomplishment, it's interesting how I'd love to go back and dig through boxes and find my original note, but see exactly how different this thing is, or how similar it may be. You'd be like, "Holy crap! This is exactly what I thought it would be. How did I remember that after 3?" I don't know. I don't even know. I know that there were a couple of the names that were in there that I kept, that I remembered all this time, and the opening line of the first book I remembered. Those I know, but the rest of it, I don't know how similar or dissimilar. So it would be fun to go back and look at that. But it is what it is. I'm pleased with it. People, I wish it had a bigger audience. It certainly, it's gotten good ratings, and it got some nice notices from Barnes and Noble book clubs and things. So, it's a good feeling. Then you're like, okay, what next?
Right.
No.
That's awesome. We talk about that that the publisher had some issues and went away, and then a new publisher picked it up. That's one of the things that's kind of unique to publishing, is that books can have a longer shelf life than some other art forms, like the music industry, for instance. If you create an album now, and then shelf it, and then 5 years later, someone else want to pick it up. The whole world could have changed by then, and people's taste and things like that. And it's like, but books are more malleable that way, and have longer lives. And it's really cool to hear that something can survive and even take on a new life of its own.
Well, I got very lucky in that, but yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things also that, I think music can be remembered for a long time, but I don't think there's very few pieces of music that get remembered and last as long as books, if you think about it. I mean, there's a lot of classical composers, but some of those guys' music is around, but then there's like thousands of their contemporaries that disappeared that we don't even remember. And so knowing we don't know, but what our grandkids are going to remember may be nothing from the music that we grew up on. We don't know, but it'll certainly be a select few. And they'll think this was the genius music at the time. And it might be the people that were like our Salieri, that were like, those people sucked, man. What the hell are they listening to that? We don't know what's going to hold up, because what resonates with people in the future is determined by a lot of social cultural factors and taste changing and sonic taste changing, the changing tempo of life. For example, there's a whole generation starting with my generation that grew up with Hill Street Blues, Miami Vice, and all this new ways of telling stories on television that make it feel like anything slow-paced is really hard for us to take. A prime example is the new Blade Runner film, which everybody complains about it being slow-paced. If you go back and watch the original Blade Runner, it wasn't that fast-paced of a film. It kind of unfolded more slowly, and I think they matched the sequel to it. But a lot of people, when they go to a big movie like that now, they expect a certain pacing. And so some people have struggled with it. And I think that's an example of how some things have changed, because if you look at the way Rockford Files used to tell stories, some of these older shows, even the old Star Trek, different things, they unfolded the story much more slowly than we expect it to now. And so the taste has changed, and people were like, oh boy, those shows are slow, man. We really, come on, get on with the story, I think with books, one of the things is that you have some of that too, but at the same time, there's insight into the world and to the way people think that is so common and universal that comes back. And you look at it and you say, I can't believe they were thinking like that 200 years ago, because I'm thinking like that yesterday. Mm-hmm. And there's a connection that you make that's a little different. Songs so often in music are just like a flashpoint of a moment in time. But there's something about books that I think they look at things on a deeper level and in more depth in ways that can be more universal longer term. You know what I mean?
I do. I think
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think to me, that's the secret why I think books tend to have that longer life. And I don't know, people do bring back albums from time to time. I've just been picking up a bunch of albums by a guy I really like, B.J. Thomas, who I grew up listening to. And B.J.'s awesome, and he's an amazing vocalist. And they're bringing back a lot of his albums finally on CD, and they never did. They finally put out all his early albums, so I'm picking up a lot of them. And it's fun for me to hear the stuff I've never heard. His, he had an incredible career, and he sung all different varieties of genres of music, and so it's kind of fun. And when I was growing up, I couldn't find any of that to save my life unless I'd have to go to the city and scour some kind of used record store for vinyl, right? And now they're putting these things out, and you can just download them off Amazon. So it's interesting that things do come back, and he's not even dead yet. They're bringing back his old albums, which is good. Sometimes you have to wait till somebody dies for them to bring everything back. BJ is still going well. Good. But so I don't know. I think in some ways, and there are books that fade out, and you never hear any more of them too. I mean, that happens all the time. Books out of print.
Sure.
I mean, part of the changing face of publishing with the ebooks and different things, I think, is you're going to see less of that in some ways. Books will continue to be available longer term, and you'll be able to find them because there's an ebook version that you can always track down. But, it's one of the complications of contracts now. You have to actually have them to tell you. You really want them to define what out of print is. Otherwise, as long as there's an ebook, they can say the book's still in print. So when you do a publishing contract, you have to kind of say, out of print is this number of sales or less during a certain period. Otherwise, your book will never be out of print, and you can never get your rights back, and it's all kinds of crazy things can happen. So, anyway, I'm getting into way too much detail, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, do what you're saying. Since we talked last, you have been prolific and a busy man. As a matter of fact, you have a number of releases just in a short window of time right now. What all do you have coming out right now?
This has been the busiest year I've ever had. I honestly, it's been pretty stunning. And considering that I have nothing coming out next year, it's going to be a really long year next year. But anyway, well, Exodus came out September 27th, and then October 3rd, like a week later, we had the Monster Hunter Files, which is the 7th Monster Hunter International book. It is a beautiful hardcover from Baen. It is co-edited by Larry Correia, who created Monster Hunter International, and it's an anthology of stories with all these other authors writing stories in that universe, including Jim Butcher and Faith Hunter and John Ringo and, a lot of really cool people. And then Larry wrote a new story as well, and I wrote a story for that with Julie Frost. So we had that. And then today we have out my new publisher, Titan, that I've been working with, put out this massive space opera anthology that I did called Infinite Stars, which is a definitive space opera and military sci-fi anthology. That's what they call it. It's 671 pages. And
you said it was massive, but I don't think the listeners quite have a grasp of the heft of this thing.
Well,
It's
the normal book that you get weighs about 1.1 pounds on average. This book weighs 2.5.
Yeah, it's excellent reading. It's also, for home protection. It's a
doorstopper.
It's a doorstop. It's multi-purposed, multifaceted.
We call it a Chihuahua killer. Basically, if you drop this book on the average size Chihuahua, the dog will die.
Yes. I think that's as succinct as you can get it with this book. It's pretty awesome.
It's a big book. So it's a beautiful hardback, but it's got 24 stories. A lot of them are novelette length, which means they're over 10,000 words. There are a couple novellas in there, and there are a couple of short stories as well. And it's got 14 new stories and 10 classic reprints in space opera and military sci-fi that date as far back as the 50s. And then there's brand new stuff in some of the most famous series. You name a series, I've almost got it. I mean, I've got everything from the Ender's Game, a new story in Ender's Game series, to the Honorverse, Honor Harrington series by David Weber, to a new Dune story. I mean, you name it, I've got it. It's pretty cool. And so that book is out today, and also my first media tie-in book, Predator If It Bleeds, came out today. And I'm sure we'll talk more about these books in a bit, but that's the 30th anniversary for the story set in the universe of the Predator movies. And then on the 31st, I have a book I co-edited with the wonderful Mr. Jonathan Maberry, set in his Joe Ledger universe. It's called Joe Ledger Unstoppable. So anyway, long story short, those are all the books I have coming out.
and we were joking about Infinite Stars, but it's an absolutely gorgeous book and full of I mean, everything that you would want from space opera and military sci-fi. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's packed full of incredible stories. Let's start with it. How did you get involved with Infinite Stars? How did you put this thing together and gather all of this great talent?
Well, I had been courting Titan. I had met Steve Sappel, one of the editors there, and I had been talking to them about doing an anthology. And we had been talking about a few ideas, but nothing quite clicked. And he set a meeting with me for Worldcon in Spokane, or however you said. And we sat down in the busy food court area and chatted. And he said, and I pitched him a bunch of ideas. And he said, you know what I really want right now? I really want space opera. Star Wars is coming back. We really want something big. And I'm like, I love space opera. I've done, these novels in space opera. I've done a couple of anthologies that include space opera before. I'm a big space opera fan. So what I really want is something that's like the old anthology, like definitive. And, so we talked a little bit over what that would look like and who he would want. And then I went out and I tried to get together a commitment list of authors that would be willing to write for it. And I went for the gold. I went for all the big name people, thinking that, okay, if I get half of these people, I'm doing well, right? But as they started, one of the things I did was say, we're going to try to have reprints from the following people. We're going to have to try to have this thing. Here's the invite list. Would you like to be part of it? I don't normally do that because, people haven't committed yet. But this time I was trying to give them a picture of the scope of what we were going for. Something that would bring together people in a way that they, a bunch of people who'd never been in the same book before and on a level that they'd never been before. And so all of them were like, well, I want to be in a book like that. That's pretty cool. That's a book I would read. That's a book I want on my shelf. I want to be a part of that book. So I ended up getting all these commitments from the people where I, instead of, half of them, I got all of them. So all of a sudden I'm like going, holy crap, man. I can't believe that I'm going to edit an Ender story and a Dune story and a Honor story and a Lost Fleet story and, Scullion Empire, all these, it's like, holy crap. And so then we, I went back to Titan and said, well, I actually got all these people to say, yes, here's the budget I need. Here's what I want to do. Do you want to do this book? And, Steve said it basically the meeting, the editorial meeting was like, he presented this thing and they were all like, holy shit. Basically, that was the response they got. Holy shit, like, we can't believe he got all those people. Yes, we're going to do this book. It was kind of that easy. So that's kind of what happened. And it's one of those things where you look at it and you go, this is a really cool thing. And this is a blessing that I get to do this book. And hopefully, let's work really hard to pull it off. So I went out and I consulted with a lot of other editors about what the best reprints would be from the various people that I had identified as key people to get reprints from. And I did a lot of reading and put my writers to work while I did all this. And that's what we ended up with.
Man, incredible. As an editor who is also a fan, how do you approach editing, something like a new Ender's Game story? I think I would, my problem is I'm not a very good critic. I'm a fan of things. And when I love something, I absolutely love it. And if I don't love something, I'm fine to just kind of walk away from it. And if you love it, that's great. But I'm not going to tell you, whether you should love it or not. I'm just not that person. So I have a very hard time being critical of things. And I'm not saying that editors have to be critical of things, but, it's, if I'm a fan of something, it's just hard for me to have a critical eye and to look for things, because I don't want to see things that are wrong.
Well, I don't know.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I think it's a fine line. I think one of the challenges that you get as you get more in this industry is you learn that you kind of have to. I don't do negative reviews anymore publicly because you'll piss people off or hurt their feelings in ways that can affect your professional relationship, or things that you end up starting a war you don't want, and it is very unpleasant. So I don't do that anymore, and even more so now that I'm well, I guess some people respect me as an editor. I'm an editor with some credentials. Let's put it that way. So you don't want to be like, oh, an editor who's edited some books that people have heard of has said this about your work. You don't want to be that guy. I'm no longer Mr. Anonymous. So and so said this about your book. Oh, who cares? I'm somebody that they might think has at least some idea what I'm talking about. Maybe that's some small way. So I have to be careful about that. So, but I think look, I have a job to do, and my job is to deliver the best book I can deliver, and to give the publisher their money's worth and spend their money well. So, first of all, what you do first is you hire the best people you can get and ask them to write something they can write well, so that you hopefully have to do as minimum editing as possible. And then you read the story and you just have a discussion about what worked for you. And if there's stuff that doesn't work or you're confused about, you go back and say, hey, I was confused about this, or this seemed unclear, or what about this? And then you kind of just, you go through it. And most of the time, what I get from people is, oh, thank God you caught that. I totally didn't, I totally wouldn't have got that. Hey, that's an interesting point. I could expand on this, and that will be clearer, and that kind of stuff. Because, I speak the same language. I'm a writer too. And they just want to put the best story out there they can. And it's all about communication. So as long as you come at it from that angle, I think it's not a problem. I don't rewrite people. If they ask me for examples of how to do something, I will give it to them. But I don't just start out saying, you need to rewrite it something like this. Or very rarely have I ever reworked something. But I did do it once or twice where I said, hey, what about moving these two paragraphs, putting this one first? And the writer was like, oh, dude, that totally moves the story along better. Let's do that. I've done it a couple of times. But I don't do it very often because I don't even want to go that far. You kind of want to lead the writer in the direction you need it to go and help them understand where the weaknesses are and let them kind of fix it their own way. So it takes some tact, it takes some practice, but I think it helps to be a writer because I approach it from a perspective of not being a jerk who is stepping on their toes, but trying very hard to respect their process and let them fix it within that process rather than without.
Yeah. I think that's a great answer. How long did it take to put together a collection like this?
I've worked on that thing for about 2.5 years. Well, if you look at
I could see that.
If you look at how long ago, Worldcon in Spokane was like August of 2015 or something like that. It was a while back. I've been working on it since then, and I turned the thing in January of this year, or January or February. So that gives you an idea of how long I've worked on this book. Yeah.
Well, the length of the stories, this was not something that just came together quickly, because we said earlier that most of these, or a good portion of them, are novelettes or novellas. I mean, these are serious stories. These are not just a little collection of short stories put together.
Yeah,
So I would imagine that the writing took a while.
Well, it did. They all had a year. In fact, in order to get some of these people, I had to actually push my own deadline back. I basically had a month to put the book together after I got the stories. And normally I allow myself 3 to 4 months. But this time I basically got the stories. They were all due January 1st, and I had till the end of January to turn the book in. So I was scrambling, and I was hoping I didn't have to do a lot of edits. And I had a couple guys who had been so busy they hadn't got a story done. And they were two of my biggest guys. And I was like, dude, am I going to get a story from you? And one of them had kind of like, oh, I totally forgot. I owe you that story. I forgot when the deadline was. And the other was like, I thought we kind of discussed it, but I don't remember making a firm commitment. Oops. And I was like, oh, crap, great. I've just lost these two stories. Well, to their credit, that was Orson Scott Card and David Weber. And what happened was I resigned myself to, okay, I've got to go to the publisher and tell them we're not going to have these stories. 2 weeks later, I get stories. They both wrote stories. They took time out of editing and writing novels and wrote me stories. And they wrote really good ones. That's the kind of mensches these guys are, man. These are really cool people. I mean, you can say whatever you want about, certainly some people have criticisms of Orson Scott Card and some of his politics, some of the things he said. I do too. But he has been one of the nicest, most decent guys I've ever worked with. And he went the extra mile for me on several occasions. And so is David Weber. And so I got to give them kudos because, I mean, getting big news stories from them in their series is a huge, big deal. And they wrote really cool stories.
Yeah. And Bryan, there used to be a time, and this is going to be unpopular, I'm sure, but there used to be a time where you could disagree with someone's politics and still appreciate them as an artist or as a person and just say, you know what, there's just some things we're just going to disagree on and, and go on about our business. And, that there are lots of, especially when you start looking through history, there are lots of people with questionable things that they've done or thought. And, if we throw out everybody we disagree with, we're going to, be sorely lacking.
Well, I mean, look, I spent years working in Hollywood, okay? And this whole, Harvey Weinstein's big on the news right now for this whole thing. And the only thing I have to say about it is that's one guy. And all these people that are piling on to talk about what a scumbag he is, a lot of them are doing it so that they won't get caught. Because some of these guys are just as bad or worse. And I know because I saw things in Hollywood, but I was, in my early 20s. I had no power, no ability to do anything. But I observed things, I saw a lot. I can tell you, man, there's a whole lot of people who are basically covering their own butt and hoping that by burying him and looking like a good guy, they can go back to doing what they were doing before, which is the same thing he's been doing. I mean, it's really, really, everybody acts like it's going to change everything. And I hope it does. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it does because we need change. But I'm pretty skeptical about how much change we're going to actually have from this because it's just an ingrained problem. Now, I think it's just going to take us a lot longer to fix it than maybe people hope for. It's certainly not going to all come from one guy. But, at the same time, my point in bringing that up is that I think that we have a reality where people are more attached to their views because we have a media climate and we have a political climate where they encourage people to be more angry and less thoughtful. It tends to be more divisive. I personally, there's one category that I judge you on, and that's it. I don't care what your religion is, what your non-religion is. I don't care what your politics are. If you're an asshole, we'll have a problem. That's basically it.
That's right.
If you're a jerk, we're going to have a problem. But beyond that, I don't care what your politics are. I don't care if I don't ever tell my writers, I grew up evangelical Christian. I grew up in a conservative environment.
So
I know you did. And I still have some of those views. I still have some of the questions that I ask. I still look at things first from that perspective. And yet, I don't tell people not to write LGBT stories when I do LGBT books because I have some issue with gay people or something. I don't tell people what to write. I don't tell people how to do what. I don't tell people how to do what, I don't. I work with a lot of writers, and I seek writers out who are going to write things from a different perspective because I believe in the power of the word and the power of storytelling and the power of points of view. I spent years working in the mission field with people who saw the world completely different from me, and it completely changed my life. And I'm so much better because my box in which I live is so much bigger. The box of perspective I'm talking about is so much wider and bigger than it would have been if I hadn't met those people before. I spent years doing prison ministry, same thing. My box is so much bigger. I live in a small town right now, and a lot of people just live in this little tiny box. And they don't see the world beyond that box. They have no frame of reference. I have tons of frame of reference. And so for me, the power part of creating the anthologies is I can give people those perspectives so they can broaden that box. And they'll be better people, more thoughtful people, and more positive contributors to society by having thought and seen things through different points of view than they ever would have because I put them in that book than if they wouldn't. So my attitude tends to be that I could care less what your point of view is as long as we can work and treat each other with respect. If you're a jerk and you're going to go out and slander me and you're going to do other things or you're going to, you're talking behind my back or whatever, and you clearly don't respect me, then I'm probably not going to work with you only because I can't edit somebody who doesn't respect me. There's no way to have that kind of productive relationship we need. So that's pretty much the only standard I use for that. But it's hard. because people are angry and people generalize a lot and they don't think through what they're saying with any thoughtfulness because they just want to react instantly. Oh, I'm so angry. This happened, you know? And I think social media has made that common practice as opposed to the older days where we would be fuming all day waiting for, you know, so-and-so to get home so we could call them and then we'd yell at them or then we'd go, wait a minute, I'm not going to yell at them because I've calmed down. You know, we don't have that anymore. Now it's just go on social media and, Hank, I'm pissed at you, you idiot. Look what you did. You know, you know what you know, and you're like, what? Who are you? No, I mean, you know, that instant thing is right there. You know, so I think it has hurt us in a lot of ways, and that's where that comes from.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think you said it best because that's my criteria as well is, you know, if you're a jerk, I don't have time for it, but you know, we can be diametrically opposed. And if we can be nice to each other, you know, and hopefully love each other at some point, you know, I'm all, you know, we're all on this journey of life together. We may be in different places and have different understandings of things, but you know, we're all human and we're all trying to do this thing together.
Well, and some of the greatest people I know are people that you would never put in a room with me based on paper. If you looked at the stats and said, this is who Bryan is, this is his background, here's the background of Shauna McGuire, or here's the background of Robert Wayne Bailey, or somebody like that, you'd say, these people will never get along, these people will never be in the same room, we shouldn't even put them together, and yet they're some of my closest friends. And I get along with them great,
Exactly.
and we don't see the world the same way, and there are topics we talk about some less than others, but at the same time, there's enough trust there that I really can go anywhere with them if I want to. We can have a discussion without getting angry or hurt, and still walk away loving each other. And I think that, you know, those are some of the relationships I'm most grateful for because it gives me a chance to see things through somebody else's eyes. Even if I don't change or agree with them, I at least have the understanding that this is not coming out of nowhere. This isn't coming out of a vacuum. This opinion is not some idiot just making things up. They've actually thought about it. And there's reasoning behind it that is valid, even if I see things differently. And I think, you know, that's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, that was a rabbit trail on a tangent, but I think it was important to I took us there, so I think it was important to talk about, you know, in the state of affairs that we find ourselves. But you know, let's you know, that the reason that we love books and art is because it challenges us to open our minds a little bit and to meet people, so to speak, you know, meet these characters we might never meet and to understand one another. And we need to let that be what it is and quit trying to ramrod people into the same mold.
I think so. I think that kind of diversity actually is, the beauty of it is not everything's going to work for you. But yet you're still going to get something out of it that's going to give you a different perspective. And you can walk away and say, okay, now I know about that, which is interesting.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So that collection is Infinite Stars. It's absolutely fantastic. We've joked about it, about the size and everything, but this thing is absolutely beautiful. It's well done. You know, kudos on that. I expect everyone to go out and pick up a copy of it. You've also got these two other collections that, let's see, the Monster Hunter Files is recently out and the Joe Ledger Unstoppable is about to come out. How is it different putting together these collections that are based on an existing writer's work and an existing world and universe and, you know, story structure?
Well,
how is that different than working on something like Infinite Stars?
Well, it's in some ways, it's very similar to Predator too, because Predator is a movie universe, and I basically went and I read all the books and as many of the comics as I could find, and looked at all the movies. And read the screenplays even after I watched the movies to get all the context. And then I was able to, you know, understand the context. Same thing with these. I read all the Monster Hunter books, all the Joe Ledger books, and a lot of the short stories and things, and came into it with knowledge of what was this universe. It helped that I was already a fan of these things. But even then I went back and revisited stuff because I needed to remind myself of things that I had read a while back. And so I, you know, first of all, I'm a fan. And the things that I do when I do a tie-in, which these are basically literary tie-ins, and they're kind of media tie-ins, but they're not the same as a media tie-in like Predator movie, tie-in. I'm a fan, so it helps to come into it and be a fan so that you're already into it and you're already geeking out over it, so you can get excited and enthusiastic. It's not work as much as it's like, I can't believe I get to do this and I'm getting paid, kind of thing. So that helps. But I think, the biggest thing is you want to do right by the people who you're kind of saluting. And the advantage I had with these two, Monster Hunter and Joe Ledger, over Predator is I didn't talk to anybody except for, there was a little bit of correspondence with Fox through my editor, but I didn't really talk to anybody of the creators of Predator about it. But I did get to talk to Jonathan Maberry and Larry Correia because they each co-edited with me the respective anthologies in their series. So we got to decide what authors to hire, what story ideas we wanted to have people go ahead and pursue. We got to read the stories together. They did the continuity edits for me, so I didn't have to do the continuity. And that way we made sure we got it right. They looked at characterization. And I kind of did the administrative and then, some of the other edits on things to polish them up prose-wise. And so it really worked out as a great teamwork. And you get to know these are two of my favorite authors, so it was fun for me, to get to play. And I admit, the reason I pitched them the ideas for these anthologies, which I came to both of them with the idea, was because I really wanted to play in their universe, and I thought, here's a good excuse to do it. So.
So, were the two books and the Joe Ledger series, which is based on Jonathan Maberry's character, and then the Monster Hunters, which is Monster Hunters International Book 7, both of these are similar enough, but very different enough. Was the process different on these two books? You said that you co-edited with each of the authors so that they could help you with continuity. But did you approach each one of these with a different mindset at all, or how did you kind of muster up for the separate projects?
Well, I think part of Larry's never edited before, so he's been through editing as an author, but he's not really been an editor. So Larry really wanted me to carry more of the burden. Whereas Jonathan has done a lot of anthologies, so he could edit. So he wasn't uncomfortable with that. So with Jonathan and I, it was more of an equal partnership on the editing level, whereas with Larry, we kind of divided up, here's the things Larry's good at, here's what I'm good at, and I'll do those things, and Larry will do the rest, kind of thing. And Larry had also never really done an anthology, so Jonathan understood all about the cutting checks and how to keep budget and all that stuff, and the contracts. And Larry, knew less about it and some of those things. So, it was a little different in that regard as far as what role I took for that. But, it was actually, it was relatively easy in both cases to just kind of, we all decided together what writers we wanted to approach. We pitched writers to each other. And these are the people we think are good, that we know are fans. Who could we get? And then things came together pretty quickly. And then we figured out what the gaps were and maybe got a few up-and-coming writers to fill some of those in. And also then went back and figured out our own stories that would offer something in the anthology that would fill in gaps that other writers weren't going to touch. So the stories that we wrote for the anthology, Jonathan and Larry and myself, were all extra things that kind of added to the whole tapestry, so to speak, of the anthology. So,
how do you approach writing those stories in these? Because as also the editor, do you approach this just like any other writer and take off the editor hat for a moment to, do you approach it differently than writing anything else?
Well, other than the fact that I wait and see what else we're going to get as far as pitches, and then pick a story that's going to be outside of that and something different than what we've already got. Other than that,
that's a cool perspective to get to have.
Yeah, that is kind of a cool perspective. For example, it was different with each of the books too, because with Monster Hunter, I wrote my story last. after I got all the stories in and we started paring them down and figured out what we needed. And I saw that we didn't have anything from really a monster's perspective. We didn't have a whole lot where Owen Pitt, Larry's main character, was the focus. So I put both those things in my story because I felt that both of those were things that would really be nice in the anthology but hadn't been done. And we also didn't really have any direct tie-ins to any specific book. So I tied mine into the book, the original book, and basically told the story of revenge of the first monster that Owen Pitt kills in the very first chapter of Monster Hunter International. That monster's brother gets a gang of monsters together to seek revenge, and they come after Owen. And so that was a really cool angle because we could tell it from a different perspective of some of the story that people already knew, and yet, we could kind of bring in this is how the monsters look at it when they're the hero of the story kind of angle, which is a different angle, which is kind of cool. So with Joe Ledger, my story, after everybody kind of pitched, I basically said, nobody's telling the story of Joe Ledger's dog. So I'm going to tell a story from the dog's point of view. The entire story is from the dog's point of view. Because Ghost, Joe Ledger's dog, is a huge character in the stories that everybody's a big fan of, and he's so cool. And I'm like, so I'm going to retell one of the actual incidents from one of the books from the perspective of Ghost. And so that's what I did. And then I went out in both cases and found co-writers who I wanted to give opportunities to and who I felt I could work with. And in both cases, they happened to be women because I was like, we need a few more women on these projects. And I brought them in and we wrote the stories together. So it was, it was cool.
So cool. So cool. How does one become involved in Predator Project?
Well, one has to be an opportunist. If you're going to be an opportunist, if you're going to be a freelance editor, you got to look for opportunities and you got to constantly be pitching stuff and looking for what the trends are, like space opera. We knew Star Wars was coming out. Space opera would be big. Now's the time to pitch space opera. I knew Predator was going to have a new movie coming out. It was also the 30th anniversary of the original release of the original Predator. So this is the time to maybe try to do something. Nobody's ever done an anthology of Predator. They've done novels and comics, but nobody's done an anthology. Why don't we do basically a prose version of graphic novels where there's a bunch of stories in one book, and we'll do an anthology. And so I pitched it to them and got a great group of writers that were interested, and they took it to Fox, and Fox was like, yeah, this sounds pretty cool. Let's do it. So basically, it was knowing that Titan did the Predator books and that they'd had some success with them and that there was an opening there that tied into two key things, the new movie, and which originally was going to come out in February and is now pushed back to August. So we're even further out from the movie than we thought. And then knowing that there's an anniversary that really deserved to be marked for the fans would enjoy seeing it marked in some way. And just kind of taking, like I said, being an opportunist and saying those are good selling points for getting to do a book. And then go in there and saying, I'm a big fan of this and I want to do it. And, the irony was I wasn't as big a fan as I am now. I'm a much bigger fan because I know way more about it than I did before I started. But I enjoyed it. I just wasn't like, now I'm like I could talk the talk with the real fans because I know the stuff now. Back then I couldn't have done that quite as well. So, but just going in and doing that, and then that's how you get involved, basically. And getting really lucky, Hank.
Yeah. Well, and having your hustle on, that's the common thread, to all your stories is that you say you're an opportunist. But, I say you're just always looking, for ways that you can, put your mark on something and look for an unserved, potential that's somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, and there's been some people in this industry that have given me some guff, and I think some of them are like, where'd this guy come from and how's he have all these books? Well, that's because I constantly am doing this. I constantly have to hustle on. I'm looking for the opportunities where they present themselves, and I'm not afraid to go in and ask if I could do something. And then they, I've had many, many no's. I've had many people say, no, we don't want to do that. And you know what? the beauty of it is it helps you understand the rejection process and accept it much better, because you're so used to rejection now as an editor that you're like, as a writer, it's easier to take rejection, because you're like, oh, I understand that the reasons for it aren't because you suck and I hate you, as much as this is not the right project for us at the right time. There's so much of that that's more, the rejection is so much more about that more often than it is about anything else, that it really teaches you that in a way that helps you be healthier as a creator. So yeah, you have to have the hustle, and you have to network. You have to go out and figure out who the people are you need to meet, and figure out how to meet them, and not be a jerk, and be interesting, and be really genuinely interested in them and what they do. And then the opportunities, you can get your hustle on, and opportunities will come.
Yeah. Well, I've had other podcasters ask me, like, how did you get, such and such writer on the show? And, the honest answer is you just ask. You be nice, you be humble, and you ask.
Yeah.
And you're going to get a whole lot of no's, and you say thank you for your time, and you try again in 3 months, and you ask. And it's no more magical than that. You just got to be persistent, and you've got to establish yourself as a nice person who tries to do good for the community. And you would be amazed what doors open when you present yourself that way.
Well, and doing quality work, and let the work speak for itself. I mean, I'm sure that authors, especially in the beginning, I've got 12 anthologies under my belt now, and I've worked with a lot of big name people. But I'm sure when I first started out, a lot of my authors were going around asking other people, have you worked with this guy? Who is this guy? And maybe, I'm sure every time I meet there are a lot of new authors who've never heard of me that check me out like that. But see, a lot of them now have friends they can go to who they respect, who say, yeah, this guy's top professional, you can work with him. So that makes it a lot easier, because, I invite them, they send an email off, their friends like, yeah, go, this guy pays well, he'll treat you well, go work with him. And it just makes the process easier. It's the same thing with your podcast. Oh yeah, Hank's great, he asks interesting questions, he's got a professional show, he's got a great audience. It's much more appealing, and they know that you're not some amateur guy that doesn't know what he's doing. And so it makes it easier to say yes.
Sure. Sure. So yeah, absolutely. So Bryan, we talked about at the beginning, you've got 5 books releasing this month in the window of time. The Exodus is finishing out the space opera take on the Moesta story. Monster Hunter Files collection, Predator If It Bleeds collection, Infinite Stars, and the Joe Ledger collection. You were joking a minute ago and said that you don't have anything scheduled for next year. But this is a pretty incredible pile of work that you've got out and coming out right now. What are you going to do for the next year?
Well, I'm in the process of working on. We're hopefully going to get contracts together to do more Infinite Stars anthologies, because it got a starred review from PW and it's getting good reviews, and we feel like it's something significant that's contributed historically to science fiction in a way that collectors and historians will appreciate for a while to come, and we love doing them, so we're hoping to do more. When the publishers marketing people slap definitive on your book, you're kind of like, oh, great, I got to live up to definitive. What am I going to do? Which is what they did to me, and I'm like, don't do that to me, man. I don't want all that. I don't want all the crap people are going to give me. But at the same time, you just try to do the best book you can, and I've been blessed that so many people are kind of like, it's got the name definitive on it. You have to question that when you see it, and then you read it, and you're like, he's done a pretty good job. So, so I'm going to do more of that. I'm going to do, hopefully, I'd like to do some more Predator stuff, certainly some media tie-in stuff. We have to see how things go with the current book, but we're discussing other possibilities. And then I'm going to do writing. I've got a novel out on the market that my agent's been trying to sell. I've got several proposals out for other novels, and I'm working on getting started on a new space opera novel right now that basically is going to take Les Miserables and turn it into a space opera. So, yeah, that's going to be a big deal. So I think that what I'll be working on, a lot of writing stuff. There'll probably be some short stories that I do. I have the invitation to do an editorial for Analog Magazine that I have to work on. So you're probably going to see me. It's just none of the big books are going to come out again until 2019 because, I mean, originally when I planned these things out, I kind of stretched them out so that they'll come out in a certain time frame, and I kind of planned on a couple of these books coming out in 2018, including Predator, but they got pushed up for various reasons. So I ended up with all of them getting 2017. So I think you're going to see me, but you're just going to see me in different forms, and I won't be dormant, but you know.
Of course not. Of course not. But publishing schedules are kind of weird, and they're not a great representation of the work that the writer's doing. But I'm happy to know that you're getting back in your writer's chair and going to crank out more fiction for yourself, because I love the collections, but I love seeing writers creating new stuff. So I'm excited to see what you come up with.
Well, it's funny because I still think of myself as a writer, but my reputation is so much as an editor now that, it's funny that people think of me more as an editor. So yeah, I'm excited to get back into it too, because it's a passion of mine. I've also grown a lot through editing, so it's going to be fun to get back into that. But and now I have kind of a lull in my anthologies, so I have space to do that because I've been so involved in editing, and I do freelance editing for novels and stuff too. That like a big part of my income, that I don't always have time to write. So when you get a window where you can do it, it's like, let's take advantage of it.
Exactly. Bryan, tell everybody where they can find you online if they want to look up the definitive Bryan Thomas Schmidt.
The definitive. Oh, dear God, man. Don't do it online, man. You can't believe most of that crap anyway. Oh, my God.
Too late.
Yeah.
Too late. You're pegged.
BryanThomasSchmidt.net. Facebook.com, Bryan Thomas S. That's like two S's in a row, Thomas and S after it. And then you can find me at Twitter at Bryan Thomas S. I'm not quite as active on Twitter as I am other places, but I do tweet here and there a couple times a week. My website, as I said, BryanThomasSchmidt.net also has my blog, which I only do that maybe once or twice a month, but I'm there. And then, beyond that, I'm around. I have a podcast called Genre Talk that I've just started doing with Peter Wax. That's genretalk@podbean.com. You can check that out. We're interviewing basically fans about their fandom and having some interesting guests. And so, I'm kind of around.
Love it. Bryan, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Not even close to the story behind my story. This is lies. It's all lies. Hank completely and utterly is a con man. Don't trust him. My God. He'll twist the tables on you. It's unbelievable.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Jason yanked the coils of safety rope to one shoulder and heaved them out the attic window. The bundle bounced over the roofline and dropped to the yard below. He tightened the harness, making sure the shoulder straps were snug over his sweatshirt. He threaded his rope through the braking device, tested it, and clipped everything to the carabiner at his navel. So far, so good. Fireman Mike would be proud. His stomach flipped as he neared the octagonal window. Had he tied the correct knots? Would he get himself killed? Weeks had passed since Mike's tutorial but he had to attempt the break-in now, while both Van Brunts were at the Christmas Eve service. He swung his legs through the window and felt for the roof. His sneakers gripped the shingles and he wriggled out, grateful for once to have feet as big as snowshoes. He pulled on a ski mask and sang, "Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can." He lowered his body. Wind punched him in the jaw like a supervillain, surprising him. His sweatshirt rode up and snow burrowed into his navel. He looked down but couldn't see his feet. He relaxed his hands and put a few ounces of weight on the rope. Clots of snow broke away, dove over the edge, and took far too long to hit ground. He drew his rope around the pipe and pulled tight. Now he could drop. No, you will not drop. You will rappel. You will rappel very safely. He backed towards the edge, towards the point of no return. The backyard lurched into view. It was a 4-story fall, and he'd probably hit the stairs on the way down. He sledded helplessly. His legs fell, swung, and kicked the side of the house. Alarm bells went off in his head. He gripped the rope. It looked like nothing. A shoelace. Jason Crane, you're a damn fool. He went limp and fell over. The rope gave a jolt, and the harness tried to castrate him. He twisted, trying to save his poor descendants. He began to spin. His arm bashed through a row of icicles. The spin slowed, reversed, and at last he came to a stop with his back to the house, dangling over the backyard. Thank you, rope. That's a good rope. Well done. He tried to turn around, but couldn't. With patience, he worked out a method of kicking in circles and managed to press his sneakers to the side of the house. He needed slack. He gathered his loose rope to the small of his back and disengaged the brake. Zip! He fell fast, all his weight on the rope now. His feet, planted, shot up over his head. The brake caught him, and the rope vibrated as wildly as a guitar string striking a note of panic. Jason heard a crunching sound and looked up. The leaf gutter crumpled and poured a stream of bitter ice water into his eyes. He snarled and wiped his face, dripping humiliation. Jason rested a moment and stared at his reflection in the glass. He was an enormous Macy's balloon drifting over New Jersey, tethered at the navel like Underdog. How the hell did you get up here, kid? He did an awkward split, 1 foot above the window and the other below, hanging sideways with his weight on one hip. He closed his eyes and reached for the sill, crouching against the side of the house. His fingernails found the weather stripping, and he tugged. Locked. He cursed and tugged again, anger rising. He grabbed the frame with both hands and pulled with all his spider strength. Something popped. The window rose and the curtains splashed out. Jason dove headfirst into the fabric, wriggled and kicked, let out some rope and fell with a whump into his archenemy's lair.